Today I want to talk about audio. I hear a lot of advice floating around out there that I believe can be really easily misunderstood, so I wanted to clear it up. Let's get into it. Now don't get me wrong, there is a lot of good advice on YouTube for audio tips. There's plenty of good content out there, but there's just some things out there that I believe will just send you in the wrong direction, will probably make your final product worse than it would have been if you just didn't do it altogether. The 5 most commonly misunderstood audio tips are: normalize your audio, stereo is better, the closer the mic the better, EQ and compression will take dull audio and make it sound amazing, and when working with EQ and compression, just slap on a preset. So, normalizing your audio. It can generally be a good tip if you don't take it the wrong way. It's going to be way easier to explain this if I jump into the computer. So I've got this client example set up here. At first, let's take a listen to the source audio.
I knew that once I clicked on that link, I actually corresponded with whoever was going to be on the other end of that. It would put me on the clock.
The loudest points were peaking at around -15. And I'd say the average was anywhere between -21 to -18. So if you wanted to normalize that to make it a more suitable level, you would just, go to audio gain, normalize max peak to, let's say, -6, because that's the general rule of advice.
A link actually corresponded with whoever was going to be on the other end of that. It would put me on the clock.
Yeah, so that works. It's going to make it louder. If you're starting a project and you have an unedited interview on your timeline or whatever you're working with, it might be a voiceover. Yeah, that makes sense. But if you wait to normalize until later in the process, you're really going to be asking for a disaster. So let's say you're working on a specific section of the timeline and you want to normalize those while you're working, and then you move over to a different part of the timeline and normalize those, you're going to get different normalization values. So even though you're telling it to normalize to -6, it's only referencing the range of clips you're selecting. So if one section was actually generally quieter, or maybe she didn't have too many inflections in her voice while she was talking, that's going to bring up the audio a lot higher because she was speaking softer, versus in maybe a louder portion. Since she was already loud, the normalization to -6 is only going to bump the audio up just a little bit. And this might sound good because you want your audio to be leveled out, but that's actually what a compressor is for, not normalization. But we're going to get to that when we cover the EQ and compression tip. Let me clearly illustrate what I'm talking about. So I have these 2 sections set aside down below here, and I picked them because this clip is generally louder and this clip is a good bit quieter. And the way I'm judging this right now is just using our volume bar as just a visual reference for how tall the waveform is, and that's going to be our loudness. So if you see here, these peaks are almost all resting right at this line. This one actually touches, whereas this one all sits well below the line. So if we were to take both of these clips and normalize them together, you hit audio gain, normalize max peak to, let's do -6. Now what Adobe Premiere is doing is it's actually looking at both of these clips. So when it says normalize max peak to -6, it's taking the max peak of all of these together. So it's raising everything until the loudest point right here reaches -6. And just to prove to you that Premiere is actually working this way, if you select this clip and normalize it to -6, and then you normalize this clip to -6 independently, you're getting different values. These are exactly the same because it had the loudest moment, but these are different. If you see this goes well above the middle line, whereas this clip barely even touches the middle line. So since we normalize them independently from each other, they're getting normalized to a different level. And while it sounds convenient, you want to save a lot of your audio leveling for compression. You don't want to try to level your audio by splitting and normalizing clips individually. That's just going to be a nightmare and is super inefficient. All right, misunderstood tip number 2 is stereo is always better. This really depends on the context of what you're talking about. Yes, stereo is better in a final master copy of something, or a final mix of a song should be in stereo, so you have a wide stereo spectrum to separate all your instruments and vocals. But when it comes to filmmaking and video production, 75 to 80% of your audio should be recorded in mono. And I know a lot of people get this, but when looking for microphones, for example, people will get all excited and send me these like stereo microphones and say, oh, these look awesome because, it's stereo audio and stereo is always better. But if I put a shotgun microphone on my camera back there, because of where I'm positioned in the frame, using the rule of thirds and whatnot, my voice is going to be slightly louder in the right channel than it is the left because I'm positioned more to the right side. And since it's a stereo microphone, it's going to capture that stereo spectrum. And when you're hearing someone talking on camera, you really want the audio to be dead center or it's just going to be distracting. And this applies in general if you're recording Foley or if you're recording anything additional to add into your edit later. 90% of the time you're going to want it to be in mono, and then you can pan it to wherever you want it to be in the stereo spectrum when you're editing. Now the reason you'd want to buy a stereo microphone is if you're trying to record some ambience of a specific area and you want to capture that stereo field. But I hate to burst your bubble, even stereo mics are actually 2 individual mono mics. And some mono microphones might spit out a stereo file whenever you're editing with it, but don't be confused because that's not true stereo. That's pretty much just dual mono. It's taking the same signal and duplicating it on the left and the right signal, and when you have the same exact thing in the left and right channel, it's just going to cancel out and go straight to the center. So now that we've cleared that up, let's move on to number 3. The closer the mic, the better. Okay, yes, my microphone is right here. It's super close to me. I don't have some shotgun mic sitting on my camera all the way in the back because that's the worst way you want to record clean audio when it comes to dialogue, when it comes to voices. Yes, as close as humanly possible is generally good advice, especially for beginners. But one aspect of close miking that really sticks out to me is Foley. So as you know, in Foley, you're probably recording some pretty weird sounds that you wouldn't really think about. You know, the sound of someone putting on their shirt, lacing up their shoes, things that you don't really think about that might just sound awkward to record. But if you record Foley, you know all the weird stuff that you have to record. So let's take putting on a shirt, for example. If someone is trying to record some Foley of that, I've literally seen some projects where it sounds like the mic is just inside the shirt or something. It's not really accurately representing the sound of that. But if you think about it, microphones in real life are your ears. And when your ears hear yourself putting on a shirt, for this example, it's not right here. You don't have your ears right here. You might as well back it off a little bit because typically with your ears, it's coming from up here. So having the microphone in a more natural position will make things sound more realistic. Now, obviously this shirt example is pretty weird, but just kind of apply that to anything. If you wanted to have some Foley of a girl screaming in the woods, typical like horror movie style, if you put the mic as close as possible to this person screaming, number 1, you have to turn the volume way down, which in turn will turn down the volume of the background with it. If you're really trying to sell that in the woods effect, you want to hear the echoes and the reverberations of the space more than you want to hear the scream. So in that case, it actually might be best to place the mic a couple feet away or several feet away from the subject when they're screaming so you're able to capture the ambience and how that's supposed to sound versus the source of the person talking, where that might eliminate a lot of the ambient sound. And I hope those analogies make sense so you know when to break that close mic rule. That brings me to tip number 4, which is EQ and compression will turn dull audio into amazing audio. Again, on the surface, yes, you can sweeten up your audio using EQ and compression. Compression you can put on to help level out some different volume inconsistencies, and with EQ you can manipulate different frequencies, accentuate certain things, so you can actually alter the way the microphone captured the source sound. But if your audio is bad to begin with, you're just going to be digging yourself deeper into your own grave. Let's take the audio straight from the camera and try to EQ and compress and make this sound better. So we can put the audio to an acceptable level simply by normalizing or raising the gain in the compressor. But then you'll realize it sounds pretty bad still, so then you might reach for an EQ and start cutting and boosting different frequencies in hopes to save and make the audio sound better. So one of the characteristics of good sounding audio is that nice low end. So you reach to the low end, you boost a bunch of stuff, and it just keeps sounding worse and worse no matter what you do. And so in this situation, our problem was the microphone was too far away and we needed to bring it closer. Or if it was noisy in the background, you weren't in a quiet space, then your microphone's picking up all that background noise and there's really no good way to remove it. You could try to throw on some noise reduction in the background, then your source audio sounds all speckly and weird, and you're just going to end up chasing your tail again and again. So nothing will defeat good quality audio from the source. Alright, and now the last tip, I want to talk about why selecting a preset might not be the best decision. So I understand audio can be scary. If you don't know what you're doing, it might sound best to stick with the preset. I mean, if you think about it, the person developing these presets has got to know what they're doing to be able to develop them. So you think, just trust their judgment and I'm sure it'll turn out fine. But the people who develop those presets don't know what your audio sounds like. They know what the audio that they tested these presets on sounded like, but your audio is going to sound completely different than what those presets did. And this is 100% true with EQ. I've almost never used EQ presets once I started knowing what I was doing. Compression might be a little different because it's all speaking about dynamics and volume. The compression presets might actually be pretty good settings to work with, but you have to make sure your audio is sitting in the right spot because again, the people that were developing those presets were working in ideal conditions. So in this client example, I have a portion of the audio put onto a new track so we can hear how it sounds with no processing whatsoever.
I knew that once I clicked on that link, actually corresponded with...
Let's work through a preset or two. So if we go up to the audio track and go to filter and EQ and add just the standard parametric EQ, this one's going to be the easiest to work with because you're able to click play and see the spectrum, and then you can actually have that visual representation to kind of sculpt things however you want. Wherever there's buildup that you might not want buildup, you can take that and easily cut it. But let's say you go with a preset instead of manually going through here and selecting stuff. You just went through preset, vocal enhancer. Oh, that sounds cool. And it applies a custom curve to this. And off the bat, it's not bad. Okay, it is cutting out the low end right at 80 hertz. I mean, that's a pretty good spot to cut out the low end. I would say this high end might even be a little extreme if the microphone itself already is a little bit harsh on the high end. Boosting that even more might make it sound worse. And cutting out the low mids right here is pretty common for like commercial dialogue. But if you see here from the waveform in the background, it's actually a little bit off. Now we're not splitting hairs here, but the way this microphone happened to capture her voice, she actually has a lot of buildup right here, which is more in the 340 hertz range versus where it was before, which is over here. So, we were like, almost 100 hertz off. And that's subtle because the Q isn't so sharp. But for the most accurate signal, you would want to have that targeted right there and pull that down. Same thing for the low end. This preset doesn't know if you're working with a female, if you're working with a male. It doesn't know what's happening. It's just very vaguely boosting the low end. I would just urge you to consider these presets as starting points. I definitely wouldn't stick with the preset the way it stands because it could just be too intense, it could be too dramatic. So you want to make sure that you're dialing this in properly. All right, let's move on to a compressor. This one is arguably a little bit more complicated to explain and usually scares people even more. I definitely want to dedicate an entire video to audio compression, specifically in the filmmaking video production space, not in the music space. It's definitely a lengthy topic to try to wrap your head around, so we're not going to go into that, but I'll kind of break down why a preset might not be the best choice. So if you go into amplitude and compression, the best compressor that I found that you can use is the dynamics. Within here you have a compressor. So all the knobs you have are your threshold, ratio, attack, release, and makeup. All right, so the easiest way I'm going to break this down is a compressor turns down the loudest points of your audio. So the threshold here determines the loudest point that you want it to start compressing. If we have the threshold at -20, any audio that peaks above -20 will start getting compressed. The ratio determines how much compression is going to be applied to the signal that goes over the threshold. So for dialogue specifically, I usually keep this pretty moderate, around 2:1. So when you put the ratio at 2, that means it's a 2:1 ratio. And then the attack and release, the attack is how fast the compressor will clamp down on the audio, and then the release is how fast it lets go of the audio. And then at the very end, you have makeup. And that is where you actually just turn the signal back up again. So in a sense, the compressor is taking the soft portions and the loudest portions and making them more manageable, but at its core, the compressor itself is just taming the loud portions. And then with the makeup gain, that's where you're putting everything back into an acceptable level. Okay, so now that everyone's completely overwhelmed on what a compressor does, you're probably just going to go reach for a preset because you don't have to do all of this calculation that sounds complicated, and you're just going to reach for a preset and call it a day. So let's say we're looking through these presets and you think to yourself, I don't want to do something that's too hard, so I'm not going to hit hard compression. I don't want it to be too soft. So let's say a medium compression range is what I want to go for. So we'll hit that.
I knew that once I clicked on that link, actually corresponded with whoever was going to be on the other end of that, it would put me on the clock.
If you see that top meter, that red signal is actually how much gain reduction is happening. So that's how far it's turning down the audio that's being sent to it.
Once I clicked on that link,
there's like negative 15 decibels of gain reduction. That's actually a significant amount of compression. I would not consider that to be medium compression. That's pretty extreme. When you're looking for dialogue compression, I mean, you really want to look for like negative 3 decibels of gain reduction or maybe negative 6. Now let's say you hear that and you know it sounds really awful, so you go to search for another preset. Let's go to soft compression.
I knew that once I clicked on that link, actually corresponded with whoever was going to be on the other end of that, it would put me on the clock.
If you notice in the before and after, there is a volume shift, but there's no compression happening. Yes, the compressor's turned on and the makeup gain is turning up the volume by 3.3 decibels, but if you look up at the top, there is no gain reduction.
I knew that once I clicked on that link, actually corresponded with.
So you're essentially not compressing anything. You would have been better off going down to this clip and dragging it up by 3.3 decibels and calling it a day. And those are just a few pretty common examples of how you can get led astray slapping on presets for your audio. And I know audio is a pretty steep topic. There's a lot of beginners, even intermediate to advanced filmmaker and video producers that still get hung up on audio. So if you have any specific questions or struggles on the audio side of filmmaking and video production, please leave that in the comments below. I'd love to do a video topic on more audio things in the future. And if you made it this far and you found any value in this video, consider giving it a like, subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date when I post more, and I'll see you in the next video.